Massive explosions continue to rock Gaza as Israel carries on with its bombardment of the Strip. Tel Aviv has maintained its efforts to wipe out the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas. It comes after the group attacked the country 2 months ago, triggering retaliation. The conflict left thousands of people killed, with scores of others injured or even displaced. Over 70 hostages were released during a ceasefire deal between the pair last month. Now, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have released findings on the Israeli attack on journalists in Lebanon. Reuters journalist Issam Abdallah was killed and 6 others were injured during the attack. Joining us is Ramzi, Kaiss, Lebanon researcher at Human Rights Watch. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time. Very concerning indeed, looking at the number of journalists who have been injured or even killed in the midst of this. In conducting your research, your report, what stands out as you pieced it all together?
Yes, certainly. Thank you for having me. As you noted, this has been, and other organizations have noted, this has been the deadliest month for journalists, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, since it began documenting journalist deaths in 1992. What we looked into, or what our investigation looked into, as well as others, including Amnesty International, was the killing of a Reuters journalist, Issam Abdallah, in South Lebanon on October 13th. Our investigation has found that 2 Israeli strikes in South Lebanon on a group of 7 journalists was an apparently deliberate attack on civilians and therefore a war crime. Witness accounts and photo evidence collected by Human Rights Watch found that the journalists were removed from any areas of hostilities in South Lebanon. They were clearly identifiable as members of the press, and they'd been stationary at the location that they were in for 75 minutes before they were hit by 2 consecutive strikes, 37 seconds apart. As part of our investigation, we spoke to over 7 witnesses, including 3 of the journalists who were injured. We analyzed and parsed through 49 videos and dozens of photos, including satellite imagery. And the evidence that we have reviewed, and we've consulted with military audio and video experts to examine the evidence. And what the conclusion that we've come to is that, or the evidence that we reviewed has shown that the Israeli military knew or should have known that the group of people that they were firing at were civilians. We've consulted with audio experts who've told us that, in line with witness testimonies, that a drone had been present over the journalists. According to the audio analysis, it had circled near the journalist's position 11 times in the last 25 minutes before they were struck. The journalists were at an exposed site with a clear line of sight to an Israeli military location in North Israel. The decision to target these journalists with 2 strikes at their position, 37 seconds apart, that led to the killing of a Reuters journalist, that caused injuries to 6 other journalists, including life-altering injuries, is an apparently deliberate attack, and this is a war crime.
The strikes were deliberate and targeted. As you try and really get to the bottom of this and shed light on the circumstances of the strikes on the day, what stands out in terms of the motive behind it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we know from our investigation is that there has been eyes on the journalists. So there appears to have been clear eyes on the journalists. This is clear from the fact that there was a helicopter that was above them. In videos we reviewed, we found that the helicopter was present south of the journalists 1 hour before the attack, 30 minutes before the attack, and 5 minutes before the attack. Live statements made by a reporter live on site indicated there was a helicopter 15 minutes before the strike, 1 minute before the strike. There is the audio analysis that shows a UAV circling near the journalist's position. There's a line of sight to Israeli military positions. In the location that they were at, there were several Israeli surveillance towers, which we know in South Lebanon are typically equipped with high surveillance or advanced surveillance equipment that would enable the Israeli military to know that these group of people was journalists. In terms of motivation, there's never a motivation to target civilians that is justified. To do so intentionally or recklessly is a violation of the laws of war and is a war crime indeed.
Yeah. So what would the next steps be as you call for this crime to be investigated and scrutinized as a war crime?
Yeah, so under international humanitarian law, parties to a conflict are obligated to investigate violations of international humanitarian law and war crimes committed by their own armed forces. Additionally, we think that there needs to be accountability for this case. This is not the first time that Israel has apparently deliberately targeted journalists with deadly results, and unfortunately there has not been accountability for previous cases in which journalists have been killed, and impunity breeds impunity. We think that Israel's allies, including the US, the UK, Canada, should suspend military assistance to Israel in light of the fact that there's a grave risk that they would be used to commit further abuses. Also, we think the U.S. should suspend military assistance in light of existing U.S. policy that prohibits arms sales to countries that are more likely than not to use them in violations of international law. Additionally, one of the journalists injured in this attack is a U.S. national, Dylan Collins, photojournalist for the AFP. We think the U.S. should also investigate the strike. And we're also calling on the Lebanese authorities to release any findings that they have conducted into the strikes in the hopes that these findings could be used in future accountability mechanisms.
Yeah, of course, putting to the forefront that crimes against media personnel are going unpunished, and some accountability needs to happen here. And of course, that in itself also raises the question around the protection of media personnel. Are you safe when you're out covering a story, and what needs to happen to ensure safety and freedom of movement?
That is true. I mean, this is why the laws of war exist. The laws of a war exist to delineate that countries and parties to any conflict must only target combatants. They must distinguish between civilian objects and civilian personnel and combatants, and only target combatants. And it needs to be made clear that journalists and other civilians are not lawful targets. And the one way to make this clear is through accountability for violations of these laws of war.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion, Ramzi.